Welcome to Rethink Gaming's Think, Rethink, Play podcast with Bob McDowell and Jerry Perkle.
Today's topic is how to railroad your players in Dungeons and Dragons.
If you want to support this content, please consider joining us on Patreon. Subscribers get a special role on the Discord server, access to all of our content, and a chance for seats at our special subscriber-only tables.
And speaking of Patreon, give a shout out to our subscribers. We have a legend tier member, Brian, and the man is the legend. And we have a few hero tiers as well. Riley, Jonathan, Cassandra, and Blake. Thank you guys so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for being brave and going first.
All right. So, what are we actually talking about today? Uh, the topic is agency.
I love this one. I'm really excited to dig into this with you. I think it's going to be a good conversation. But before we go to there, let's do some introductions.
Who are you?
Well, I'm Bob. I've been running this game for 35 years, since I was 9 years old, if we're keeping score. Uh, I've played almost all the versions of Dungeons and Dragons, many other games as well. I read this huge library of books cover to cover, absorb it all, try to be the best player dungeon master I can be, and teach others how to be their best as well.
And I'm Jerry. We will not keep score because I've only been playing and DMing since the 90s. So you win there, Bob. I write awesome D&D content, which I publish mostly on DM's Guild, and I am a house DM at RPG Dungeons in Carrollton, Texas.
Yep, definitely accomplished author of some really awesome content, and I'm really privileged to be able to make this podcast with you today.
That's awful sweet of you to say.
So, what is then agency? What do we mean by that?
That's it's a pretty big question, like philosophically, but we won't go down that route because that's it's a big rabbit hole, you know, into the matrix. Like we don't want to go there. Um, but yeah, uh, I guess in philosophy or religion, agency is the capacity of an individual or an entity of a thing to act in any given environment.
Yeah, that's a really good way to frame it. From a role playing perspective, I look at it as making choices that matter, right? Kind of the whole purpose for going through the exercise of playing the game is to take your character and do things, and the things that you do should happen in the world and matter.
Okay, so this should be a part of the world. That's what you're trying to say.
Absolutely. If you've ever been in a game where it did not matter what you did, regardless of what you tried, super super frustrating experience.
Been there, done that. Um, when I was in high school, I experienced something like this. I had a very adversarial dungeon master, and these things kind of go hand in hand sometimes, but not necessarily, right? Where the DM is actively against the players. In this situation, he was trying to kill us because things weren't going exactly the way he planned or how he wanted, and it was frustrating for him, right? Um, but I guess in real life, it's hard to predict what people are going to do. But if you take those
Right.
people who are playing a character, I'm no longer Jerry, like I'm a knight or I'm a wizard. I'm going to take that to an extreme, and I won't react in the way that Jerry normally would.
Right.
Um, yeah. So in this case, we threw out different options, went a different way, and as I guess a punishment, he took away those options. He took away that agency by throwing unstoppable giants with spears the sizes of trees at us. Right? It
Uh,
was just
yeah.
completely unwinnable situation.
Yeah. Stack the deck against you.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you tell that story. It reminds me that it happened to me once. I used to co GM, in this case, riffs with some friends of mine also back in high school, and wound up through the consequences of a player's actions locking him up in prison. So the other GM offered to sort of switch off, and he said, "Oh, I've got this great idea for this adventure I want to run," and he sort of explained it. And I was excited because I hadn't had a chance to play a character in a long time, and I had this cool new one, and like this is high school, so I'm drawing this character in class. If you can think of like the level of attachment, it's like, oh, I finally get to play him, right? But long story short, the whole adventure was just a setup to kill my character. All of the other players had brought characters specifically designed to kill that superhero character I had created, and I guess teach me some kind of lesson. I don't know. All I really learned is that's not fun.
What was the character's name?
I was Doc Mock. I was able to go the speed of sound and was actually a medical doctor. So that's riffs for you.
There you go.
Yeah.
I'm totally bringing back that character in D&D.
Yeah, we should. We should make that a thing. Watch for that in an upcoming supplement. It'll be awesome.
There'll be a tabaxi cleric.
There you
He can
go.
run very quickly and do
Nice.
surgery with his little claws.
Yeah, you have to bring it into the world.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So back to the topic of agency. I was really excited when we picked this one because I think it's super, super important and just like essential to the concept of running the game and running it well and making sure everybody's having fun. But you don't see it talked about. If I reach over here and I pick up my fifth edition Dungeon Master's Guide, that word's not in there. Railroading's not in there either. It just doesn't approach that topic. Have you noticed this, Jerry?
Yeah, it's something that I feel is discussed kind of widely online. Um, but it's kind of like the official content, especially the recent stuff. It's not there, right? And it kind of reminds me of the older content as well, right? Like the idea of agency. Just I don't think it was really considered much, right? Um, if you look at the old traps and the old dungeons, like the DM was definitely out to get you, right?
Yeah, to some extent, right? That reminds me, I've got the 1979 AD&D DMG here, words of the
Hmm.
the ghost of Gary, if you will. Yeah, it does kind of touch on that. It's like you are the creator and final arbiter by ordering things as they should be. The game as a whole first, the campaign next, and your participants thereafter. You will be playing Advanced Dungeons and Dragons as it was meant to be. Um, so yeah, the players are kind of third on that list, and I would say these days most of us don't run the game that way anymore.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, talking about old books here, the Grimtooth traps, right? Like, there's a reason players were walking around 10-foot poles and
Right.
poking around at every loose tile and everything, because yeah, like the dungeons would murder you horribly, and it's I mean, if that's what you're in for, that's fun, that's okay. But if you have any investment at all in your character, that's just not
Right.
fun.
Right. One of my favorite D&D adventures, Tomb of Annihilation, is a loving riff on Tomb of Horrors. But Tomb of Horrors is
Mm,
just an absolute character death trap. I mean, it's designed to screw over the characters and kill them as quickly as possible. Ha ha! Look at me. Even in the modern iterations of it.
sure. I mean, the dungeon's like a sausage maker, right? The players go in and nice ground up meat comes out.
Right. Yeah. Until they stop playing. I got another book here. It doesn't call this topic agency, but the old Star Wars role playing game actually has a section here about giving options. And it says if the players feel that they never have a choice, that you have predetermined what their characters will do and say, and therefore how the adventure will turn out, they're not going to have any interest in playing. Part of the fun of a role playing game is the almost unlimited possible reactions to any given situation. Take that away, and you've lost much of the reason for participating in this type of game.
Sure. So which edition of Star Wars was that?
This is the old D6, revised and expanded. So this one is printed back in '97.
Hmm. And
I
nothing
remember.
after that version matters.
Yeah, I don't think there was a Star Wars version after this. Pretty sure.
um, yeah. So kind of what you're saying here, choices matter, right? And on the flip side of that coin, consequences happen, right? Good or bad consequences.
Right.
And yeah, in my opinion, a good DM lets that happen, but then they use the consequences against the players.
Right. Yeah, it's part of making those choices matter. Right, reflecting what they're doing in the world that they're participating in.
Sure. And we're not talking about punishment, but if their choices, change the wider world, then they're definitely participating in the world. They're definitely a part of the world. Recently started a new campaign with a group of players that I originally DM'd just for a one shot. Right, it was a level 20 campaign, so I gave them all like the OP magical items. You had the staff of the Magi and not the Vorpal sword, the slicey one. What is that one? I don't know. But anyways,
Okay.
they could basically choose the magic weapons from the game. And at the very end of the game, uh, or after the end of the story, the guys decided they're gonna teleport over to Waterdeep and the Yawning Portal, have a couple drinks, and as a joke, right before they were you know brought back to their own reality or whatever it was part of the
Yeah.
story, one of the players broke the staff of the Magi, which
Ooh.
rules is written. It's a magical nuke, right? He takes out a large portion of Waterdeep. Well, this group decided that they wanted to play a long-term campaign with me, and I used that incident, that action, to kind of create the first major conflict in the story, right? Like,
Hmm.
Waterdeep burned, people are afraid what's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really elegant because the new characters didn't make this decision, but the players did. So you're still kind of bringing that home to roost.
Sure.
Yeah, that's really good. I think you have another story about an interesting decision when you were on the other side of the screen. You want to tell that one?
Oh, sure. I mean, you mentioned it earlier, Tomb of Annihilation, which you were the dungeon master for. I was the player. I played the world famous Liam Longtongue, the greatest bard that ever lived.
Right.
And yeah, he actually um, completely destroyed, you know, 3 or 4 combat encounters, some traps, a nice chunk of one of the uh, many, many rooms in the Tomb of Annihilation. And
Right.
without getting into spoilers, basically the bard, you know, convinced some of these dungeon minions that they needed to move this trap from where it was to you know someone's
Right.
bedroom, basically.
Yeah. So he played the bard right, best bard ever, um, leaning hard into the persuasive capabilities. So here he's persuaded these dungeon maintainers to move the traps. Um, Now, just backing up a step, I feel like as a dungeon master, when you're running a published campaign, especially one that's popular and talked about online and such, you kind of owe it to the players to run it as written, at least as much as you can. You can run a custom version of it and should customize some, but if you've made it so weird that they can't talk about it with other players online, you're kind of taking away from that shared experience of, oh yeah, I played Tomb of Annihilation. Oh, I remember that part. It was great, right? Um, so here I have a player that's presented me with a situation that's completely unexpected, and I could have shut that down, and I could have said no, we're gonna go through these encounters the way that they're intended, but I didn't. In fact, I think I surprised you.
Yeah, absolutely. It was I was expecting pull trap and they're done, but no, they just kept pulling junk out of this room.
Yeah.
and changing things around and resetting stuff, and I was like, "What is going on?" And
Yeah.
it was just as surprising as if you would have tripped the trap yourself there, right?
Right.
So yeah, it was rewarding, it was interesting, and yeah, it was wrong with the punches. What you have to do as a DM.
Yeah. So just as we've got, you know, bad stories, horror stories that come out of like taking agency away, leaning into agency, saying yes, and okay, yes, they're going to take out this trap, but your instructions were unclear. They're going to take out all the traps in this room, and they're pulling out things like you said that they didn't even know were there. Impressive things, no spoilers. And um, I kind of took that risk level of a 3 request that he made and ramped it all the way up to 12, just to lean hard into that decision and reinforce it for him.
Yeah. And like we said, very memorable experience.
Exactly. Yeah, those are the good ones, right? When you can come away with a story like that.
Hmm. There's far more stories from that campaign and that dungeon particularly that I wouldn't call good stories. Like I think I'm scarred. I think I have PTSD from the Tomb of
Yeah,
Annihilation.
I think it's built to do that. That's one of the reasons why I love it. It kind of has those old school vibes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So
All right.
again, kind of going back to the topic a little bit, agency is choices that matter. Um, Railroading is the opposite of that. You're making choices, and it doesn't really matter what you do, what your input is. The predetermined is going to happen anyway. Am I
Mhm.
describing that well?
I think you got it right. But I feel that there's a time and a place for it, right? For railroading. It's this, evil term in gaming, and I don't think it really even comes from role playing, right? I think it comes from video games, actually,
Hmm.
right? It's the if you think about it, like people reviewing these video games, like is this like a linear story? Is it open world, right? Is it
Right.
sandbox? That's like the big kind of aspiration, right? And maybe not for good reasons sometimes, right? In video games, really, I mean, it's like any other story. You're there to participate in the story, right?
Right.
If the best way to do that is to railroad you through a section or to tell an entire, story arc, awesome. That's one way to do it. Another way is to have your huge open world sandbox, right?
Right.
Um,
No, that's really good framing, and
yeah,
I appreciate that you bring up the notion of a sandbox because I do want to be a little bit careful about what we're talking about here. This is not necessarily a conversation about how the campaign is structured. You could be running a module, or you could be running an open world sandbox and still be railroading your players, if we focus on the agency, right? If your open world sandbox has an overarching plot that's going to happen. The dragon is going to capture the princess and is going to do this and is going to do that. That's just as much of a railroad, even though it takes place in a great big wide open setting.
sure. But that being said, the world moves and lives on its own. Some events happen whether you choose to participate in them or not, right?
That's right. Yeah. And then again, in that way, you're making the choice to not participate have meaning, right? The characters outside of their view are not sitting around waiting for them to show up. They
Sure.
can choose not to do it. They can choose to let time pass.
Yeah, and I think you know my feelings, right? As a DM, like I just want to tell a really great story,
Yeah.
right? So in that vein, like choo choo, right? All
Right.
aboard the Jerry Express. Like I'm the storyteller. You're in my story. You're
Choo
riding on my
choo.
train. Exactly. Um, and a good storyteller can change a story based on player input,
Yeah.
right? So you don't want to fall into the trap of over I would say over planning, that's not really the right word, but over scripting what's going to happen, right?
Right.
Like to me, like I know, the track of my story. I know what's going to happen, but you can't hesitate to kind of, change things.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. I think in the end, it comes down to the player, right? Is this something that's going to be fun for them? Are they having a good time at your table? Are they glad they're there? Are they going to come back next week, right? If you're telling a story that leverages that's pushing them towards their goals, or maybe thwarting them in a way that's going to be interesting to overcome, then you're doing the right thing, right? If you're pushing the story to where you personally want it to go and they're not enjoying it, that's where you're taking away their agency has probably gone too far. Now,
And then
I,
even
I was going to
sure,
say,
and then
I
go
absolutely
ahead.
agree with you that railroading is a wonderful tool in the toolbox. And I've said this many times. If you listen to me talk long enough, I'll say it again. I'm a toolbox DM, right? Many, many different techniques that you can use and picked up from all these little books and stuff over the years. It's about knowing the right time to use which one, in my opinion.
Sure, and then also kind of even when you're not talking about, an overarching story, zoom in a little bit, right? Like you can impact agency at individual encounter levels, right? You
Mhm.
can you can fall into these same sorts of traps.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're thinking of a scenario where, like, let's say we've got a little rogue, and he's specialized in picking locks, and he comes to the only door in the dungeon that's got a lock on it, and he's going to go pick that lock, right? And it's like, oh, good, my character choice has finally paid off. Um, then here comes the barbarian, and he doesn't want to wait for this. He's like, I'm going to smash open the door. Well, as the dungeon master, you can adjudicate that right away and be like, okay, roll strength. Sorry, rogue guy, you don't get to pick the lock. Or you can stop and say, no, hold up. Let him try the lock first and see if he's successful. You just wait a minute, um, which overrides that barbarian player's agency, but you're doing it in favor of the rogue, and you're doing it to reward the rogue's choice to take that proficiency. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and there's also a couple different ways to handle that as well, right? Like roll for initiative, right? Roll the dice, see who makes it there first.
Right?
Um, or also, congratulations, barbarian, you succeed in smashing the lock. It's now damaged and even harder to pick, right?
Right. Right.
So again, roll with the punches.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Don't stay trapped in your own thoughts, because if you've come to a decision, if you've come up with an idea in your head about how you think things should go or how you'd rather them go, you're going to be biased towards that outcome from that point forward, right? Kind of need to approach it with an open mind. I once had a dungeon master explain me the role. He labeled it as, you are the clockwork god, it's your job to just adjudicate the things. I don't agree with that per se,
Mm.
but you
No,
need a measure
actually.
of that. You do need a measure of that.
Yeah, I'll buy that, but yeah, that's an awful description.
Yeah, you can't be completely apathetic, or your players will too.
Who was that guy? Do you want to call him out publicly right here now?
No, I do not.
Okay, okay. You're a
Good,
nicer guy than I am, Bob.
good human being. Many, many conversations about dungeon mastering took place.
Wait, it wasn't me, was it?
No, I said good human being.
Oh, right.
Uh, anyway,
Ew. Yeah,
so can we take this too far? Right? Is it possible for a player to agency themselves into the grave?
absolutely. And you should give them all the rope they need to hang themselves, right? But that being said, uh, I mean, you should know your players. You should kind of know what they want.
Right.
And if you're really invested in a character and you're about to do something a little bit crazy, it doesn't hurt to give them, a bit more warning.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think, again, right, for the choice to matter, they need to have some information. They need to have enough information to realize what's going on. I will routinely, when let's say I hear my players having a conversation amongst themselves, and they have a fact that's materially wrong, right there. Somebody is saying, "Oh, we're here to kill the dwarf, right? We're supposed to kill the dwarf," and I know that the quest giver told them to kill the human that works for the dwarf, not the dwarf, and that this is going to mess things up for them, and they just don't remember. Why do you take a step back? Do they have it wrong because I didn't describe it very well? Do they have it wrong because they didn't take good notes? Do they have it wrong because it's been 4 weeks of real time since we played that specific session, right? They need to be making the choice to kill that dwarf for agency to actually come into play. Otherwise, it's just a mistake. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. And those mistakes can happen. They're fun when they happen sometimes.
Right,
But again, make the call, right? What is more fun? And what
right.
is realistic, right? That's a big part of it. Like you're controlling the reality of this fantasy world, right? Would the players actually make that mistake? It depends on the situation,
Yeah,
but probably not, right?
yeah, and that sort of goes to the a balance of power between a dungeon master and a player, right? So the DM, they control the cosmos and everything in it, including all the information they give the players about the world. They describe what they see, what color it is, how it smells, how it feels, how it tastes, right? All of that information is available if the DM gives it, if the player asks for it, but if the DM gives it, if the character should have known it. Um, you have to kind of play that very carefully because they are deaf, dumb, and blind. They're tunnel visioned without your input, right? They don't know what they can't see because you didn't describe it.
And they only know what you've told them.
Yes. And in the context in which you told it to them, right? If they only heard a certain thing because that was the topic at hand and they didn't notice the topic shift, for example, that misunderstanding is not their fault. So again, in that specific situation, I would pipe up and say, no, they hired you to kill the human. You can kill a dwarf if you want to, but that's not your job. You were supposed to do the human. And then somebody might go, wait, what? If they ask you a question, if they follow up immediately to this piece of information, this reminder, that's kind of where you know that, okay, you were right to intervene and they're off track. If they're like, no, 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 I know what I'm doing, just drop it. Let them go ahead and do the thing they want to do.
The dwarf.
The
Yeah.
dwarf. That poor dwarf. Wherever you are, little dwarf, I'm sorry I killed you so many times tonight.
There you go. So when is it okay to take that agency away?
Yeah, so in the situation we mentioned before with the barbarian and the rogue, right? If you're in a situation where a player is removing another player's opportunity for fun, that's probably time to step in.
Hmm.
Um, and when I'm running the game, I like to, during the game, be subtle and redirect because nobody likes to get called out in front of their friends. And specifically, if you call somebody out in public, they're going to double down on that behavior more often than they're going to backtrack on it. They're going to want to justify. They're going to want to appear that what they did was right. So you just avoid that altogether. Subtly redirect the behavior, and then have a conversation with them in private and say, "Hey,
Hmm.
dude, Joe really wanted to play a rogue, and this was his only chance to open that door. What are you doing? Why don't you want him to open that door? What's going on?"
Sure. So players taking agency away from other players is not okay.
It's really not. I mean, it happens from time to time, especially as you have like alpha people or people that want to lead the party. But
Hmm.
keep that in check because you're really the only one who can. Also, X card situations, right? If somebody's going into an icky place and you don't want that to happen, or you know that the person sitting next to you is not enjoying this, that's a good time to take away agency as well and just say, no, this is not going to be what my game is about.
Hmm.
Um, we talked about Jerry's Bard. He's never once played the sexy Bard trying to seduce everybody. You know,
It's just me personally knowing that, I could never play sexy. That's the truth there. It's it's actually very tragic.
but if that were making somebody uncomfortable at the table, you'd want to shut that down. Even though the Bard could theoretically seduce the dragon, sure, but you get your mom in the group with you or something. You don't want to go there.
Yeah, you really don't. All right. So, what happens when you have those players that are intentionally causing problems, right, or intentionally ignoring your story? Like, you throw those crumbs out there,
Right,
and they have full agency, and they
right.
brush the crumbs aside.
Yeah, yeah. So a couple different ways you can deal with it, depending on what you think the motivations are. If you think the person is not being a friend, if you think the person is not participating in the thing that you've put in front of them and are asking them to participate in, this type of player would kill the innkeeper before he can say hello.
Mhm.
Those types of things. That's when you really need to talk to the person and say, what is going on, right? This is not the game that we usually play. Why are you being so weird? And maybe they just have a problem with the campaign. Maybe they felt railroaded into this city and didn't want to go here in the first place. And you can start a dialogue there. If
Is
in general they're
everything
just
uh,
not into what you're doing, that's kind of a different problem.
yeah, is everything okay at home?
Right. Yeah. Show me on the doll. No, maybe not that.
No, no,
But
no.
uh, yeah, so if they just don't like it and they're not interested and they want to do something different,
Mhm.
maybe you didn't read their backstory close enough, right? Maybe they're pushing toward their character goals and you just didn't see it that way. A lot of
Yeah,
different
it's
tricks you
a
can use, though.
yeah. I mean, it kind of brings up kind of an interesting point, right? Like, you know, you talk about they're not being a friend, right? A lot of times you're not playing with friends; you're playing with complete strangers, and it's a very collaborative game,
Right.
obviously. And if you are not playing with fun people, you're not going to have a fun time,
That's right.
right? Uh,
Yeah.
uh, unless I mean if you're all on the same page, that's okay. Um, so if you're playing, games in public, especially I don't know if you've ever done any of the Adventures League stuff, right? You're
Hmm.
playing D&D with like complete strangers,
Yeah.
and you can have strange situations come up, right? A lot of times, I mean, it's a mix of experience. You have complete new people to like, people
Yeah.
been playing, like Bob since the dinosaurs, and
I did
yeah,
once have a
like
dinosaur step right into the middle of the table. It was
yeah,
terrible.
it was awful. But yeah, I mean, it's it can impact the game basically, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
that's a fair point. I mean, so when I use the phrase, I'm aware that maybe you just met these people, but hopefully,
mm,
Dungeons and Dragons for you is a collaborative and safe experience, such that they could become your friends, right? If you're playing an adversarial
mhm,
game of D&D, you're probably not doing it right. There are other games that do it better, quite frankly.
sure, all right.
So, when we talk about agency, though, we talk about making decisions that matter because you have the information. I do want to kind of play to the counterpoint on this just a little bit, that
Mhm.
imperfect information can be a good thing too, right?
Sure.
So,
You got to take in. I mean, that's a storytelling device, even right? Like you have the imperfect or the untrustworthy narrator.
right.
In your case, that shouldn't really be the dungeon master, but he can do that through NPCs. Um, and it's again, it's a useful tool. It can be good, but it can be used very wrongly as well, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Again, you got to try to stay focused on what you think the players might feel is fun.
Mhm.
If they think they've cleared the dungeon and they think they have all of the items, but they forgot one, maybe you railroad them a little bit and put that last item in their backpack without them knowing, other than making them go back and repeat an empty dungeon because they thought they picked it up but didn't.
Yeah, absolutely. Hmm.
Yeah, so like I said, I do want to make sure that the players are making good decisions with good information, but oftentimes you withhold a piece or you change something behind the scenes for them a little bit. You can kind of nudge things in the right direction, and it totally does take away their agency. Again, in the example I just gave, they chose accidentally to leave that other item behind. You're overriding that decision, but you
Mhm.
kind of need to be a steward of the experience and make sure that they're glad they sat down at your table and that they want to come back.
Sure, and that kind of, you know, brings up a big philosophical debate, which I don't know where you stand on it, but I know exactly where I stand on it. And that's kind of DMs who use the DM screen, right?
Yeah,
I am absolutely 100% on board with, um, nudging fate with a
right.
dice roll in one way or the other, right? Sometimes fails are funny, Your story shouldn't revolve around it, and you should, like anything else, use a very light, skillful hand, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. Um, it can be tempting to change a die roll or change a result to nudge things in a specific direction. And I think that has its use. Let me say this clearly. There are a lot of ways to shape outcomes, right? To get the game where you think it should wind up. You have a lot of power to do that as a dungeon master. And it's okay if some of that power is changing the die rolls. I've done it in the open. Just the other night, we had a really bright plan. The party was super excited about it. It involved some dynamite. We're going to go and blow up a mess of bad guys. And the damage roll was just crap. And it sort of foiled the whole plan. It was like this anticlimactic moment because of some bad rolls and some d6s. And I'm like, no, roll that die again. Re-roll that damage. We want this to blow up big. And they got a much better roll the second time. I'm a progressive dungeon master for sure, but I think it kind of made for a better experience for everybody. And I could have done that behind the screen, but I'm okay doing it in front of them too.
Yeah, and even when giving information and narrating, right? Like, don't be afraid to directly say what is going to happen, or what someone's motivations are, what someone wants.
Yes, absolutely. And you can reveal a lot of information out of character with some description as well. That's a whole other video. But yeah, you can definitely cut to the chase on some of those. You don't have to try to act out someone who's frustrated. You can say they're obviously very frustrated by your question, and that conveys
Mm.
just a ton of information in a brief sentence.
This guy looks pissed. He's
Right.
super pissed. Like, very good.
Absolutely.
That's something I think you did really well with the descriptions, and again, Tomb of Annihilation, right? It actually, I feel like I leveled up as a player in that game because
Ah,
you know
thank you.
we would step into a room, right, and I would listen very carefully to what you said, because there was some, for lack of a better term, like some stupid traps in
Yeah,
that dungeon, right?
they really were.
But I mean, what you need to solve these traps in every single situation except for one that I would question,
Mm,
that we can talk about later, with those spoilers offline here. But I feel like you gave in the description all the information we would need to solve
hmm
that puzzle, right? Like, everything is there. So break it down, listen to the description, and go from there.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And playing the characters well, the you know the narrating through the voice of the people that are there and that sort of thing, you can just convey tons of information and kind of nudge people toward making the choice that you hope they'd make anyway. I've also heard it said, I've not tried this before, but I've heard it said that if you want a party to do something, just have an authority figure tell them that they're not allowed to do it. I'll have to give that a try someday and see if that works.
I love it. And I mean, there's other ways to nudge that. I'm trying something that I've heard in several podcasts, um, uh, actual play podcasts. Dungeons and Dragons does this very very well, I think.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And that's Dungeons and Dragons is D&D and Fantasy Australia. It's hilarious. I love those guys.
Yeah.
But yeah, their party has like a manager, a patron, right? Like someone who like goes along and tells them what to do, right? Like it's an interesting tool, I think. Um, Again, it can be heavy-handed. It can be used to kind of overly railroad. Um, so in my situation, like the campaign running, rather, the patron has limited ability, um, to communicate with the party. So it'll only come up when it really needs to come up.
Okay. Makes
So he's
sense.
not he's not an actual NPC riding along with the party, right? Who's
Yeah.
always there, who's kind of can be a crutch, right?
Yeah.
So what would your character do? I had that situation come up in a game before, right, where the player was riding along with their mentor. They kept asking the mentor questions. Oh, they know more than me. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, just ask, right? Players forget that all the time. You can go find somebody in the world who knows a heck of a lot more.
Hmm.
Your dungeon master's dying to tell you.
Yeah,
So go find somebody and ask. Yeah,
find the right person to shake by the shoulders.
right.
So there you go.
Okay. Well, we don't have a guest for tonight's podcast, and I really wish we did. We definitely need to get one for next time, right?
Sure. And
Um,
I mean that's good plug right there. If you'd like to be a guest or if you'd like to promote something, you can hit us up on Discord or drop a comment in YouTube or wherever you're consuming this podcast. And yeah, even if you want to tell us that we're wrong,
yeah,
we would love to argue with you. No one loves arguing more than Bob.
I will not
Uh,
back down from an argument. I just can't do it.
and if you're arguing with Bob, I will be on your side, no matter what
Right?
it is, even if I disagree with you.
Yeah.
Just because it's a good thing to do every now and again.
Yeah, I love that about Jerry. A lot of people just let me run roughshod over things and don't argue with me. Jerry never will. So I love that I can count on him for that.
Even if we agree.
Yeah, which helps me hone my arguments and make them razor sharp, which is also awesome
Sure.
as well.
Yep.
But in lieu of a guest, I did turn around and gather us up some questions and answers, and I thought we could maybe throw these back and forth at each. Well, not the answers, always, but the questions. So we've got a little list here. Do you want to take a crack at one? Do you want to go first,
Sure.
or do you want me to go first?
I'll go first. I'll do
Okay.
the. I'll roll the higher initiative here. So, the first question: how do I make my players run away?
Yeah. So I actually saw this in a Facebook conversation.
Hmm.
It's like monster that the players should obviously run away from. And my advice is don't attempt this. It usually ends in tragedy. Like you give them the insurmountable monster, and they're going to expect to be able to win that fight, and they'll
Hmm.
suicide against it instead. At least it's been the major experience. It can be done, but it really takes a careful setup.
Yeah, and I think that's the. I disagree with you until the very end there, right? You said the careful setup.
Yeah.
In my first session that I just ran for a new campaign, I actually did this. Right, I set up by the first encounter. The players fought this champion who was at half health. He had a bad accident with some fire. It happens.
Mm.
They fought him. They had a tough time. He was you know appropriately difficult encounter for them. Well, fast forward later in the session, and I describe some guys charging down the road towards them,
Hmm.
and they looked like this champion, except for they were all healthy, right? And there were 16 of them, and there were three dire wolves, right? And it was a no brainer. There's no argument. There was no questions or decisions. What should we do? Uh, the obvious, um, I guess, solution was to run because
Yeah.
they knew that they were unable to face these odds. So I guess you could name this, right? And we'll name this tool, this technique, fight the baby first, right?
Okay. I
if you
like the
fight
name.
if you fight a baby dragon and have a hard time,
The
when
big
you
one.
fight when you fight the daddy dragon, you're
Yeah.
gonna run.
All right, all right. You heard it here first. Fight the baby.
Fight the
Uh,
baby.
yeah, and it goes back to another good dungeon master lesson. Jerry's very clearly demonstrating the power of show, don't tell. Right? Demonstrate to them in a safe way, a survivable way, that these are bad dudes and you shouldn't mess with them. You just barely survived that fight. Here comes a bunch more. What do you want to do? That's going to get your message across a lot better than just plopping one big giant Tarask in front of them and asking them to run away.
That's also something you don't want to fight. It's a baby Tarask that they're
Do
just about as
Tarasks
bad.
have babies? I mean, there's only the one, so I don't know how that would even work.
In SRD, you can find stats for them.
Oh, okay.
Uh, yeah, some like 200 something hit points, but they still have the stupid reflect magic ability. Is
Okay.
it like it's like you roll a d6 on the 1 to 5, your spell reflects from it, like your direct spells that target something
Oh,
like magic missile.
yeah, yeah.
If you roll a 6, it reflects back directly at you as if you were the target.
Nice.
So yeah, it's It's dumb.
That's pretty annoying. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so my turn. Another
All
question I
right.
saw.
Mhm.
How do I put my PCs in jail?
This I can see how this would be controversial. I've done it. I think I've done it successfully before. Um, but actually, what's your take on it, Bob? Like,
Well, I think the only way to successfully do this safely is
mhm,
talk to them about it first, right?
mhm.
Not during the game you're about to run tonight, but after that game. Sit down with them and say, hey guys, I have a great idea for a prison break adventure. And if you're into it, we're going to start the next game with you guys having been in prison for 2 or 3 weeks and you're going to break out or whatever the pitch becomes. Don't focus on, I'm going to beat you up with guards and force you to throw down your weapons because I don't often see players do that, right? And they're going to suicide by guard first, in my experience.
Sure. I've done this a couple times. Once very recently, and I actually started the story with the party tied to these posts that were dripping with blood, and little muddy puddles of blood were on the ground. Right, they were prisoners.
Yeah.
People were just being executed by this Inquisition. Pretty terrible stuff. But I started the story that way. Like I put them right in the middle of something. There was no, hey, let's have a party at an inn. I
Mm-hmm.
said, that happened last night. You woke up this morning with a hangover, and this is your situation. Um,
Okay.
and but you have to give them an out, right? In this case, I introduced them to that patron, and then yeah, a fact that I like to rub in your face every chance I get. I was your dungeon master before you were mine.
So
I
true.
ran a game for you, yeah. Even though it was at your house. Yeah, and I did this in a very fun way, right? I had the players in an unfriendly town, and I had them engage in a drinking competition,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And the drinks were a little strong and a little poisoned, and the players actually competed against each other to see, who would pass out last, right? As that last player was passing out, the bad guys kind of look at them and reveal themselves. I think there's even a poem associated with it. It was a very bad poem, but
No,
yeah,
it was good. All of the poems were good. It's a great adventure. If you ever get the opportunity to run it, you should. We should totally do a 5e version of that thing.
I should
Um,
write that up. I definitely should. But yeah, I
so
mean, the
good.
players woke up in their prison afterwards, right?
Yeah, yeah. What I was gonna say. So this kind of goes into the choices have consequences thing, right? So instead of
Mhm.
choose to surrender or die, no, it's like here's a drinking contest. Do you want to participate in that? And as a player, I'm going, I'm gonna win that drinking contest. Give me the flagon. We're gonna go all in on this. The consequence was waking up in jail, right? So yeah,
Sure.
that plays right into agency there.
And kind of the problem with taking away agency, I think, is that can be. I mean, you kind of throw your hands up if you are in that unwinnable situation again that we talked about at the very beginning, right? Like
Hmm.
that's incredibly frustrating. Like, hey, I can't do anything here. I need a way out.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, like if you were, a rogue and you smuggled in some thieves' tools, easy money, you're out, right? In this situation, I gave like a very easy DC check. Hey, there's some, some carcass, a small animal bone, something was maybe food, maybe it was a chicken or something, right? You
Yeah.
could probably use these bones as lockpicks because these locks aren't in very good shape, right? And of course, if you're a prisoner, like you take all their stuff. And people don't like losing all their stuff, you know.
Yeah. It's a big part
So
of
that has to
D&D.
right. That has to be it has to be easily recovered, right? Like you can't don't don't take their stuff permanently, right? Like that's bad news. It's not fun, right?
Right.
But in this situation, you walk down the hall. There's some guards in a guard room, gambling and stuff, and you have to get into fisticuffs and get your weapons back.
Yeah. Yeah, so you're
So,
briefly sort of inconvenienced. You're set back with a hurdle that's overcomable, and
mm,
then you're put back to the status where you were.
exactly.
It's perfect. Yeah, it was really good.
Yep.
Like I said, I can't wait till we publish this one over on DM Skills because this is a great adventure. Um, really, really good stuff.
All right. Last question here, Bob. Uh, what do I do when they won't follow the plot I have planned?
Yeah. Yeah, this one is good, right? So the impulse is, well, you railroad them, you just force them to do it.
Hmm.
Maybe, probably not. So, for example, you've got a series of encounters planned for Frozen City in the north, and you want the players to head up there and do that thing. That's where the MacGuffin's at, right?
Hmm.
And they're dead set. They know what you're up to, and they're going to foil it. They're dead set on going south. They're headed for the desert. Well, it's not that hard to take a frostbitten encounter and reskin it to a desert encounter. Instead of cold, it's hot. Instead of snow, it's sand, right?
Hmm.
Voila. You can use all your prep time, all your materials, tell a very similar story while not forcing them to make the decision. And if you do it right, they won't know that you switched it on.
Sure. I mean, that's actually so easy. The the desert to the snow, or vice versa. Like the largest desert on our world is the Antarctic desert.
True.
That's the
Fair
thing.
point. Yeah.
It doesn't rain, so it's a desert, but
Right.
it's cold as shit. So
Yeah. So you just kind
there's
of
that.
figure out, how can I say yes? Right. How do I say
Hmm.
yes to the decision they're trying to make? Similarly, if they're trying to do something that just doesn't make any sense for the world, maybe they're just rejecting the story you're trying to tell. Maybe they just want to have a little bit of freedom. It might make sense to dust off a one shot, to buy yourself a little bit of time, or even just an encounter. If you've run one fight with six bandits, you've run them all. It's not hard to present that encounter to them. And while they're figuring out what cool moves they want to do, and these are battles that you can easily adjudicate as a DM, you've done these before, you can be thinking about what your next move is. But maybe you've got that one shot, you've read it, it takes like an evening to read through one of these, and you can present them with the next interesting thing to do, maybe as a diversion, and they can get back on the story after that. I've seen that actually work a number of times. Some of the modules can do that with wandering encounters and stuff. We've got a good little module, little one shot called Strudel Feud, which is centered around a family tomb. You can put that anywhere. That could be anywhere in the world, literally. And they stumble up upon the quest giver guy who wants them to go look at it. It kind of takes them out of the plot for a little while, gives them a chance to say, I'm doing that instead of the stupid thing with the princess that you want me to do, and they spend a few nights experiencing some freedom instead.
Sure. There's nothing wrong with the side quest, right?
Exactly.
Hmm.
All right.
All right.
Well,
I think
again, just to bring it home, so the key points here are to make sure that your players are having a good experience. That can be through railroading, or that can be through complete agency. It's probably best a mix of both. But when you do let them make choices, try to make those choices matter. Those will be the moments that they remember in the stories that they eventually come back and tell.
sure, and you know, make them a part of the world, right? Consequences happen,
Right.
good or bad,
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of the whole point of the game, right?
right? Hmm. All right. I think that's is that all we have?
I think so. I mean, again, we've touched on some topics that could be their own shows. So, um, maybe we put on the Patreon a poll which one we should do next. I think this has been a lot of fun. I can't wait to tackle more of these topics with you.
I think that's a great idea. Can't wait. And for everyone out there, don't forget to become a member on Patreon to take advantage of more great content. And come join the conversation and argue with Bob on Discord.
That's right.
He'll
We
love it.
love yapping about this stuff.
And yeah, you can find links to all of our stuff at rethinkgaming.com.
And remember, think, rethink, play.